What's up, Covalence friends? Today, we're going to be playing around with the web component library Shoelace once again, except instead of loading it from their CDN like last time, we're going to be loading it from our own local node modules. And the benefit of this is because it actually translates really well into other libraries that also load its own assets, and so this same method can be applied elsewhere. Let's get right into it. All right, so we're starting off with our Express template ESM repo. And if you happen to watch our last Shoelace video, we actually loaded the entire library in our index.html. We loaded the theme in our head, and we loaded the actual entire JavaScript library in the body. And we loaded it from their CDN, but now we want to actually change that to load it locally. And the reasons for doing this, are they kind of vary. But I would say one of the primary reasons is that you have a little bit more control over the actual product being delivered, right? If you're loading from something from a CDN, you don't always know if the CDN is going to happen to go down one day, or if they're just going to stop maintaining it. And at least you know that if you're loading everything locally, you have that copy of the code permanently, right? So if you have it fixed to a certain version in NPM, you're always going to be downloading that exact same code, and you're going to be serving up that code yourself as well. And so serving things yourself, I feel like, is a more reliable, future-proof method of doing things rather than just always taking something from a CDN. However, sometimes the CDN can be significantly faster depending on what you're paying for and that kind of thing. So most of the time, CDNs are the fastest. You can always start with that, but I do feel like there is some, there's importance in knowing how to actually serve these libraries yourself from your node modules, right? And so we're using the ESM module because Shoelace is ESM based. If you don't want to do ESM, you're gonna have to use something like Webpack or a bundler to do that. And that's not too bad if you have it already set up. We actually have several templates and repos already set up with Webpack. So check it out, use one of our bare bone templates. And yeah, you should be good to go. And you can actually import the CSS, the theme CSS yourself. And you can actually bundle the JavaScript as well. But what we're going to do is we're going to kind of do this method of being able to serve our node module files locally. And because Shoelace actually uses asset files like fonts and images and things, it has to be able to find those assets somehow. So it's actually going to be looking from a relative path standpoint, it's going to be looking in its own folder essentially and looking for these assets. And so if we want to go kind of first and just open up a terminal, and we can actually npm install Shoelace, so npm I at shoelace style /shoelace -s save, we are going to actually install it. And if we want to look at the package.json now, it adds the at shoelace style shoelace, and they're on version 2.0. And we can kind of lower that a little bit. And what we can do is we can actually open up in File Explorer and jump into node modules. Let's see if I can, it's not going to really let me zoom in here. Hopefully you guys can kind of see this, but we're trying to pull up, let's see if I can bring it a little bit bigger. Okay, hopefully you guys can read this. But what we want to do is we want to actually go into at shoelace style. Oh my gosh. Well, Windows is not the greatest for this, but there's an actual folder called Shoelace here. And inside of that, you have this dist folder, and pretty much everything is in this dist folder. And it's essentially it contains all the assets. It has each of the components separate, and it has its themes. And then it also has the shoelace.js file, which is the entire library. But if you wanted to, you could actually load just individual components. If you only needed a single component, you could just load that component, and it would kind of keep your code that you're delivering to the client small, making your page load faster and making everything better, right, for the actual end user. And so that's a pretty awesome feature of this library. It's also an awesome feature of just ESM in general and how you can actually compose your libraries to work that way. But let's kind of just jump into this and let's kind of figure out exactly how we're going to do this, right? And so basically what we want to do is we want to be able to point our search essentially to this directory, right? The at shoelace style /shoelace directory, because we're going to allow Shoelace to look into this dist folder everywhere that we go. So if we go into index.html, if we want to actually load a theme, we can actually load the theme by doing Shoelace. And this can be anything. You could name this, you know, slash web components, whatever you actually feel like doing, you could name that whatever, because what we're going to do is we're actually going to point it to the folder that we require based off of our server itself, right? And so we want to call it slash shoelace, and then we can say slash dist, and then we're going to look at our themes first, slash themes, and we want to just load the light.css. So slash dist slash themes slash light.css. And that's basically just following that entire folder path down. You could load the dark too if you wanted the dark theme. But we're also going to be loading, at first, we're just going to load the entire library, which is shoelace.js. So we can also copy this script tag, and we're going to load it first, and we'll say slash shoelace, and then slash dist, and then shoelace.js. All right, so, and then we can actually, at first, we'll just make sure that that loads correctly, and then we'll actually add components and make sure that works. But what we want to do is we actually want to go into our index.ts here, and we're going to jump into this configure file, or configure function. Wow, losing my mind. But we have our configure function here that basically figures out what it wants to send. And what we want to do is we don't want to send it through public. We want to actually .use for anything with shoelace. We're going to actually point it to a express.static. And what we want to do is we want to actually resolve dir name. So we're going to basically pass this path in. We're going to resolve the dir name. And instead of going back to index.html, we're actually going to go back to slash node modules slash at shoelace style, and then slash shoelace. All right, and so that's essentially the folder that it's going to look in. And since our slash shoelace is basically the path that follows that, it's basically going to be what appends onto the directory that we pass in here, right? So it'll basically append on the slash dist slash themes slash light.css, and it's going to look in that folder for any files that you're actually going to be using, right? And so hopefully, if shoelace is written correctly, which I know it is, it'll actually be looking for the assets properly as well, right? So it'll look for it in slash dist slash assets, and it should be able to find all of the assets that it needs. So we now have this working, hopefully, and we can go ahead and we can actually run this real quick. Let's do it. So let's npm run dev. And what we're going to do first is we're just going to make sure that we're actually getting the file that we want before we keep going, because it's possible, could have made a mistake. So we got hello world. Cannot use import statement outside of a module, shoelace.js. Well, let's see. I think we actually have to make the script type module. Let's see, script type module. Let's go ahead and rerun that real quick. All right, so there we go. So it actually was able to grab the file, and it grabs it by a bunch of chunks, but we can actually see the shoelace.js file is being imported correctly. We're grabbing what we need. So we are serving the correct file, and we actually have our light.css here as well. So again, just to be clear, the shoelace.js file is an ESM file, so we need to add the type equals module to our script tag. That was just something I forgot to do. Apologies. But yes, you want to make sure that you add this, and you will be able to load your module components and the entire library itself, right? All right, so now that we actually have this, let's just make sure that we can load components here. And we actually did a drawer last time, so let's go ahead and just actually try that drawer out real quick. Which, if you watched the other video, I'm just going to use the exact same code. So I'm going to remove this hello world, and I am going to add this drawer in here. And I'm also going to add a little drawer button as well. All right. And let's go ahead and add our color picker as well. I think we added a color picker in the last video. So let's go ahead and add the color picker. All right, so you can watch the other video to get this exact code, or you can just pause the video here, copy it down. But I basically just pulled this directly off their website. It's nothing fancy, no custom code really. But let's go ahead and reload this real quick. And you can kind of see how at first you see this kind of load like this. So that's actually from, I think I went into this in the last video as well, but that's actually from the HTML. The web components haven't been registered yet. And so this HTML is still present in the DOM. So what you really want to do is you actually want to, essentially hide the body there, and you can load that body later on if you need to, right? And so there's actually a pseudo selector that can be used to do that. And the way that you can actually, let's see if I can find this real quick. Let's see, CSS. Yeah, so what we'd want to do is we can go into public, and this is actually in the last video as well. Instead of having this h1 in here, let's just go ahead and we're going to, at the top of this file, we're going to add this pseudo selector, which is not defined. We're going to say visibility hidden, right? And so all the web components that haven't been defined, basically it's going to hide them, but it's going to keep the spacing the same, which you may or may not want. You could say display none, but that's going to actually remove it from the DOM tree, where this actually keeps some elements in the DOM tree. So all this text will stay in the DOM tree. And but what's funny is something like a drawer, you probably don't want to do that. And so what you could do is you could actually set classes and things like that. And you could say when it's not defined, so certain classes will be display none versus some will be visibility hidden. But let's also just do a quick div and give some margin in here as well. We'll do top margin, top and bottom margin, no left and right margin. All right, so now when we actually load this again, you can see that it's a little bit nicer. It doesn't do that little wonky initial load issue, but we can open the drawer here. Actually, we can't open the drawer. Oh, because we don't have any JavaScript. All right, sorry guys. Again, I keep thinking I'm still in my other project, but we actually need JavaScript to actually run this drawer. And so if we want to actually be able to do this, we can see that the color picker actually works out of the box, which is nice. But let's go ahead and just copy over our JavaScript as well. So instead of just doing express rocks, we are going to just kind of copy over the entire thing here. So this is from our last video. Again, the link to that video is in the description below, but it's just the drawer. We're basically querying selector in the drawer here. And it actually, you're able to query selector the custom component or the web component's name itself, which is really nice. And then the drawer itself has functions on it. So the drawer has a show function, and it also has a hide function. And we're querying selector, or sorry, we're selecting the open drawer button and the close drawer button. And we're just adding click functions to that, click listeners, and we're showing it and hiding the drawer. And so now when we actually go back to this, reload this page, when we open the drawer, we see the drawer opens perfectly. We can close it, and our JavaScript is all hooked up, right? So the color selector doesn't need any JavaScript. It just goes ahead. Now that value here is going to be the hex value, or the value there for that color. And that's pretty awesome. It even has a screen selector there. So this thing's pretty cool. And again, awesome little components, and definitely something that you can use. Now, let's say you don't want to load everything. Let's say you only want to load a certain component. And so Shoelace here, this is Shoelace's website. Let's see if I can zoom this in a little bit. They have this concept called cherry picking. So cherry picking is pretty cool, where you can actually, if you can see right here, you can actually import only the components that you want to use. So instead of actually importing the entire module, you do this script and you say data-shoelace, and you give the actual path that we're already using. So let's go ahead and try this real quick. And let's just say we want to only load the color picker, right? We don't want to actually load this drawer. We're going to keep this in here just to make sure that it doesn't work, right? Because it shouldn't work if we don't load the entire library. And so let's go ahead and we're going to say, we're going to change this to data-shoelace, and we're going to only put the actually it's just /shoelace. And we want to, if we go back to the site, you can actually see that it just imports the component itself. So we want to import, but we don't want to import the button, obviously. So we need to actually look up what this drawer is called. So let's go ahead and pop that open real quick. We can see components, and we want to see the color picker, right? So it's color-picker, and it's color-picker.js. So color-picker, color-picker.js. And so if we actually run this now, we should be able to open that up, and whoops, we didn't actually get the color picker. So let's see if we can actually figure this out real quick. Let's pop open what we're actually loading. Relative reference must start with either. Okay, so let's try and just import /shoelace. Reload this. All right, so you can actually see that the drawer showed up, but what it didn't do is it didn't actually, none of the JavaScript works because drawer.show is not a function because we didn't actually load the component itself, right? And so we got this button, right? And we have this, if you can actually see there's this huge gap up here, that's the drawer itself not being defined. So we have the button, the drawer is not there, but our color picker is working perfectly, right? Now, likewise, if we wanted to swap that, instead of the color picker, we want to actually use the drawer. It's drawer and then drawer.js, right? So again, sorry, I just want to redefine what I actually changed here. When we're importing, we're actually importing from our server. So we don't actually import from @shoelace. We want to import from just /shoelace/dist exactly the same way that we're doing the CSS and the JavaScript like before. And so if we want to do the drawer here, we're going to change that to drawer. And now our color picker should not be defined. And since we have that CSS, right, we have the CSS, it's not actually going to even show this. It's going to just be a missing little area, but this big gap will disappear because the visibility of this is going to turn into the drawer itself, right? And so if we reload this page, we're not getting our button, of course. Let's see. Oh, we don't have the actual SL button defined, so that's a problem. All right, so that is an actual SL button. That's my bad. I thought that was a regular button. So we actually need to import, what we could do is we could import the button and the drawer. Let's load that. All right, so now we actually have our button. What's interesting is that button actually worked when we loaded just the color picker, but now our drawer works. Everything looks awesome. I'm not actually sure why the button worked. I think the button must be loaded with the color picker. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that more, but I'm assuming that the color picker uses SL button. And so it actually has to import that. And so if you like, for instance, if you just import color picker, you actually get the button as well. And if we wanted to, we could actually look into the color picker and figure that out, but it's not super important. Let's see, just real quick. Let's see if I can just pull this up. Color picker, colorpicker.js. And yeah, it's too small for you guys to read, but you could dive into that and you can actually see exactly what you're dealing with. And my assumption is that somewhere in that color picker, it loads the button itself. So that's why the button showed up. That's why the drawer didn't. And yeah, I highly recommend you play around with this. And I also highly recommend that you only load the components that you need to, and you should be good to go. You could actually move this script up above here and it'll actually run that beforehand, and you wouldn't have to worry so much about visibility. But I just like to go ahead and use this and do the visibility hack, or the visibility trick. It's not really a hack. It's honestly how they recommend you do it. But in that sense, you are going to be speeding up your page load and still being able to use all the components you want from Shoelace. All right, so I hope that was easy enough to understand. I hope it was pretty straightforward. I hope you enjoyed some of that real-time debugging, and I hope that you can actually take this concept and apply it to other Node modules or just libraries in general that you need to do this with. But if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. We'll be happy to answer them. We're happy to create additional content if you guys need it. So feel free to let us know, and check out our website, check out some of our courses that we offer if you're looking for additional help, and we hope to see you soon.